So the interesting story about this one, this is number 007 because it was limited to 352
Of course
pieces.
it is. Yes.
And so this is 007. But I was I saw this when they introduced it at Basel World.
Yes.
And I loved it, and they said I wanted it, and I said I want number 007, and that had to be approved by Reynold Ashelman at the time, was vice president, and so he approved me 007. And then we were in Switzerland for the Crown Montana, and we went to the factory, and they were starting to come off.
You were at the Omega factory.
The Omega factory, yeah, and they weren't yet producing this.
Yes.
And Greg Kisling at the time, who's their designer, brilliant, and he still had a designer. So anything that's been coming out, all these new models and designs, it's all Greg, and he's an absolute genius. But he took me aside and he said, we've decided we're going to add the date window to this model. So all the Globemasters have a date at 6 o'clock, and that was part of the new 8800 movement or whatever it was. And the thing is, they have a steel model that now with the date looks almost identical.
Yes.
And so it was me and one other collector at the time. He got number 1, and he was like a big time collector who gets number 1 of every limited edition. So he has a lot more power than I do. Okay. And I said, well, how do you feel about that? And he's like, I don't care that much. And I spent the night trying to convince him why this should not have a date. And then he came on board, and we submitted a letter to Stephen Urquhart about how the platinum should remain without a date. And then a few weeks later, we get an email saying we've reconsidered, and we're going to make this a dateless model. So what I've always wondered is if there's a date wheel somewhere under there spinning around.
But the casing is a platinum. It is a platinum.
It's platinum, yeah.
It's not just platinum stitching. It's a platinum watch.
It's a platinum case, yeah. Yes. And it's got the enamel medallion and the gold rotor, but the bezel is white gold, because as Rolex will tell you, up until last year, it's very hard to make platinum fluted because it's a very difficult hard metal to work with.
We will talk about shortly. Yes.
Yeah, so, that's why historically the platinum day date has always been smooth bezel. So
it's like, how I pull out pens in my office when we're about to go signing. This is how he's pulling. Oh, by the way, this is the Longa, and this is the day date, and this is the Omega, and this is the one that the president got me, the 007. So I gotta ask you a question now, because I've watched John Mayer interviews, and then I gotta know, because I know he's been taken to the factory, and then they've just customized them and created watches on the whim of what he wanted. Did you ever have one of those made up for you?
No, but we got a little bit into the conversation, because the other collector there absolutely was, and he wanted a minute repeater, and I'm not sure where that is in production right now, because he was a big Patek guy.
Yes.
And it's funny because he had Patek, and he was deep into Patek, and just had this soft spot for Omega. So you're talking about like billionaire type wealth, and so that's why every limited edition that comes out, he gets number 1 of. And so they were talking about that, and then I was talking about other models that I would like to see, and they said, oh, well, we could potentially have you meet Mr. Hayek, and then never happened. But
just to be clear,
so they do that.
But to be clear, like, for example, like you read about these collectors, and Spilly J on CWC, you picked up the Longa from him, I believe, right?
Yeah.
He gets these watches. All of a sudden, he'll have this $250,000 Patek that the person customized with a different dial. So you got the original dial and you got the custom dial. Yeah. To be clear, for somebody to come to Patek, and first of all, just to get Pateks in general is very difficult, the popular ones. Somebody's customizing their own Pateks. What kind of dollars are these people spending on? Like, we're now in the not just hundreds of thousands, right? Like, we could be now in the millions easily, correct?
Oh, easily. Yeah.
So to be clear, so we're going to talk about levels, because everything's levels, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about levels of watch collecting. John Mayer's going to the factory getting his own watches. There's John Mayer, there's RJ, and there's me. I'm down here, Hey, I got my DeVille. What's going on? But it's funny because, no matter where you are in the game, you can always find somebody that's just a little more, like you're saying 70 watches. Like most people can't fathom that. But, it's like DJ Khaled with his shoes. I'm sure there's people that got 700 watches. Like it never ends.
But the thing is now, so some of those hardcore Patek collectors are now really, really upset because a guy like this guy, now they won't even return his calls, and he spent millions of dollars with Patek, and it's because Leonardo DiCaprio wants that Nautilus or Jay-Z. So now it's not only how much money can you spend, is what can you do for the brand, and no one cares that this 70-year-old guy billionaire is going to wear his Patek in his home, in his home suite or on his yacht. They want to see it out there on the wrists of celebrities, and so that's where it's become more this this whole other world of trying to sell a lifestyle idea. You just wonder who they're selling it to, because no one can buy the watches. So it's unless it's part of a they know that in the long run production will meet demand and they'll have to sell to someone.
Without getting too deep into it, but just a curiosity, the retailers, the manufacturers, the connections you've built up, it sounds like you've built up a quite extensive network for yourself. Do you find now less people are taking your phone calls than they used to? Has the game changed for you?
Yeah. And the hard part is there's a lot of turnover too. And so, part of with Omega, when Stephen Urquhart left, and the new presidents come in and the new staff come in and the boutique managers leave. And so it's tough in that way, because the people you really form relationships with are now at Christian Dior selling handbags. And so there's so much turnover. And
they don't give the client list and say, by the way, this is RJ, make sure you take his call. You're starting from scratch then, in that case.
Well, a little bit, but then it's also that some of the joy of the watch was the relationship with the person you were buying from, and even at the higher level. But then also now that watches have taken on this completely different power and life force, the collectors are no longer the priority, if they ever were, but the brands no longer seem to care about the collectors at all. So they care about the heavy influencers and the celebrities, and then just pushing as many pieces to market as possible. So that's what's really strange, and it's changed dramatically. It's all about the
image, but beyond image already. Now it's about it's again, like you're saying, like it's stature. It's not just how much money you have, but who you are and how you can influence somebody seeing it, your brand on their wrist. And a stupid question maybe, but I think from the watch collector's side, we've all said this at some point, but did you ever come to a point where you said to yourself, you know what, I've done it, I've had it, you know what, screw this, I'm going to sell off the collection, I'm going to keep one or two pieces, and I'm going to call it a day, I've had my fun, now I'm going to go off to the sunset and do other things? Has that thought reached your mind? And how close?
Once a week.
Once a week?
Every week. Once a week. Well, it's funny. Every so often, I wonder what the hell I'm doing. But it's really, I made my New Year's resolution was to only buy one or two pieces this year that would be significant pieces, and I've already.
I remember you already broke that. You said it's going to be about quality, not quantity. So you're just going to say bigger grails, and things change. But what stops you every time? Have you?
And that's the thing. You find a piece that a deal comes up, or an offer shows up, or it presents itself, or they introduce a new piece.
Yes.
So it's really easy for those impulse buys, but I think that at some point it will happen. The tough part is right now I really love my collection. There's very few, some that I might see moving out if something else comes along. So I'm pretty content right now with how things are. But when you think about the romanticism and emotion around watches, and you think about at some point you're going to pass these on, you want it to be something more meaningful. So when you think about some of the watches that I've gotten from patients after they've passed on, that the family wanted me to have, those are watches that every time I saw that guy, that was on his wrist, and it was part of his identity. And so when you think about passing on a watch, I don't want my son to have a watch saying, yeah, this was one of 70. I don't think he ever wore it. It's in new old stock condition. So at some point, they'll boil it down to a handful that will kind of be the defining pieces of who I am, so that when they get passed on, they'll have some scratches and dents and DNA on them. Because it's my father's watch is a much more meaningful idea than one of his 70 watches that I don't recall ever seeing him wear. So at some point it'll have to boil down.
Besides wearing my RJ watch, I have a 78 Datejust that was somebody's wedding gift, and it was up on against CWC, and the guy told me the whole story and sent me a picture, and it's like, and I said to him, you got the watch, the bracelet sent off to the bracelet magician in Hong Kong, and then you got the watch service in Rolex. You spent so much money on this watch. Why would you let it go? And he goes, you know what? Got another watch that the son bought. So the son now buys him the exact same watch, but it's a newer model, and it's just sitting and nobody's wearing it, and might as well have somebody else enjoy it. But like, I'm wearing the guy's engagement watch. You know what? That has some meaning to me. So I enjoy that. You know? Again, it's about the stories. It's about the stories.
And they'll live on forever too. So there's a little bit of immortality.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, whenever I pull out some of those old vintage pieces, that person's spirit is then walking with me that day. And so it is a bit of immortality, because you think about them when you might not have otherwise.
If there's one piece of advice that I can give to a watch collector, having been there, and I believe I made this mistake, is keep your first. Like, I know, especially if you don't have the money and you're saying, you know what, I got to trade up and everything else, but you will regret it. I guarantee you, if any kind of money, you will always want back your first real watch. Like, not a watch. Okay, there's timepiece and there's watch. Your first timepiece, please keep it. Trust me, you'll be happy you did. Thank you for enjoying today's episode of the Chosen Life podcast. Go ahead and hit the subscription button below and the notification bell to catch all of our great shows. And remember to contact the Chosen Lawyers when you are ready for your next real estate and commercial transaction. Go to kormans.ca.